You think I don't know what you're doing?" The words exploded from my mouth before I could stop myself. I stood frozen behind the dressing room door, my hand clamped over my lips. The air smelled of roses and perfume, but it felt thick, suffocating. My heart thudded against my ribs as I leaned closer to the crack in the door. My groom, David, stood outside, his voice low and dripping with venom. "She's clueless, babe," he said, and I heard the faint giggle of a woman on the other end of his call. "By the time she signs those property papers, we'll be set for life. Her family's fortune is ours." My grip on the doorframe tightened until my nails dug into the wood. I wanted to burst out and confront him right there, but something inside me whispered, "Not yet." The woman's voice came through the speaker, sultry and cruel. "Make sure she goes through with it. Play the loving husband. Once you have everything, we'll disappear. She won't see it coming." My blood boiled. My wedding dress suddenly felt like a costume, a disguise for the naive bride they thought I was. I had always believed in David, his charming smile, his promises of forever. I was the fool who gave him my heart, and he was the monster who planned to rip it out in front of everyone. I stepped back from the door, tears stinging my eyes, but quickly evaporating into rage. Rage so strong it felt like a storm was brewing in my chest. The choir was rehearsing downstairs, their voices floating up, singing about love and forever. The irony nearly made me choke. I didn't run. I didn't scream. Instead, I reached for my phone and hit record. If David wanted a show, I'd give him one he'd never forget. The wedding venue was a 5-star hotel in Lagos, dripping with luxury. Crystal chandeliers sparkled, and gold ribbons tied every chair. Guests in vibrant ankara and expensive suits mingled, sipping champagne. They were here to celebrate love, but they'd soon witness betrayal served cold. My maid of honor, Saad, knocked on the door. "Girl, you ready? It's almost time." I forced a smile, masking the hurricane inside me. "Yes, Saad, I'm more than ready." As she fixed my veil, I studied my reflection. I no longer saw the innocent bride. I saw a woman who was about to reclaim her power. Walking to the limo, I held my bouquet tighter than ever. The ride to the venue was silent except for the pounding of my heart. I remembered every sacrifice I'd made for this relationship, how I helped David when he was broke, how I believed in his dreams. Every memory now burned like acid. We arrived. The driver opened the door, and the cameras flashed. Guests gasped at my beauty, but all I could see was the altar where David waited, smiling like the devil in disguise. The ceremony began with a hymn. My father's arm felt strong as he walked me down the aisle, but my knees threatened to give out. I kept my head high, smiling for the cameras, while inside I was plotting my next move. David's eyes lit up when he saw me, but I saw the flicker of fear when our gazes locked. Did he sense I knew? Good. Let him sweat. The vows began. He went first, speaking with fake tears and trembling hands. The crowd swooned, some guests even wiping their eyes. To them, he was the perfect groom. To me, he was a snake. When it was my turn, I took the microphone. My voice was soft, almost sweet. "Before I make my vows, I have something to share." Gasps rippled through the church. David's smile froze. I pulled out my phone, pressed play, and his own words filled the sacred hall. "She's clueless, babe. By the time she signs those property papers, we'll be set for life. Her family's fortune is ours." The room erupted. Guests murmured in shock. His mother clutched her chest. The mistress, yes, she was there, stiffened in her seat, her face draining of color. David lunged at me, but security held him back. "You'll regret this," he roared, his mask ripped away. I calmly removed my ring, holding it up for everyone to see. "For the record," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos, "I moved all my assets yesterday. You'll get nothing." The crowd gasped again. Cameras flashed. Social media was already buzzing. David shouted, "You can't do this to me." "Oh, but I just did." I dropped the ring at his feet and walked away, my gown sweeping behind me like the cloak of a queen leaving her throne. But as I reached the door, I turned back. "Oh, David, this is just the beginning. You'll wish you never tried to play me." The door slammed shut behind me. The night air hit my face, cool and freeing. But I knew this wasn't over. David wasn't the type to back down, and neither was I. As I stepped into the waiting limo, I called my lawyer. "Prepare everything," I said. "The war has started." And just like that, the wedding turned into a battleground. You think weddings are about love? Think again. This was only round one. And trust me, the next moves will shock you. "You humiliated me in front of everyone, Amara." David's voice roared through my phone hours after the wedding. I was sitting in my hotel suite, still in my gown, staring at the city lights of Lagos. My makeup was smeared, my heart was broken, but my spirit? Stronger than ever. I held the phone away from my ear as his curses spilled. I didn't respond. Not yet. Let him feel the silence. Finally, I spoke, my tone cold. "You humiliated yourself, David. You betrayed me, and I exposed you. Don't call me again unless it's through my lawyer." Click. I hung up. My fingers trembled, not from fear but from adrenaline. The war had officially begun. The next morning, the tabloids were on fire. Bride exposes cheating groom at wedding. The video of David's confession, captured by guests, had gone viral. Thousands of comments flooded social media, some praising me, others mocking him. My phone buzzed nonstop. Calls from family, friends, even strangers. Saad came over eyes wide. "Girl, you broke the internet. You're trending everywhere." I sipped my tea calmly. Good. Let him taste public shame. But it wasn't enough. Public humiliation was just the appetizer. I wanted justice, legally and financially. While I was speaking to my lawyer, David was plotting his counterattack. He posted on Instagram, painting himself as the victim. She overreacted. It was a misunderstanding. Love forgives. The comments were brutal. Some believed him, calling me cold. Others dragged him mercilessly. I ignored it all. I had bigger plans. That night, I packed my belongings from our shared apartment. My lawyer had already filed for annulment and frozen any joint accounts. David tried to block me from taking certain items, but I had receipts for everything. He couldn't stop me. As I loaded the last box in Asada's car, a black SUV rolled up. David stepped out, eyes blazing with rage. "You think you can just walk away?" I stood my ground. "Watch me." He smirked. "You'll regret this. You're nothing without me." My laugh was bitter. "You'll soon find out who's nothing without who." Saad pulled me into the car, and we drove off, leaving him shouting in the street. Days turned into weeks. I focused on rebuilding my life, but David's shadow loomed. He tried calling, texting, even showing up at my workplace. He left flowers, love letters, and fake apologies. But I wasn't falling for it. My heart had turned to steel. One evening, I got a call from an unknown number. It was the mistress. Her voice dripped with arrogance. "You think you won? You only embarrassed yourself. David is mine now, and will still take what's ours." I smiled to myself. "Thanks for calling. You just confirmed my next move." I hung up and dialed my lawyer again. "Find every illegal thing David has done with my accounts. I want evidence." Weeks later, my lawyer handed me a file thick enough to choke an elephant. Fraud, money laundering, even forged signatures. David had been using my name to secure shady deals. My blood ran cold, but my resolve hardened. "We'll take this to court," I said. The trial date was set. The media swarmed the courthouse when the case hit headlines. Cameras flashed as I walked in, head high, in a sharp black suit. David was there, looking disheveled, his mistress clinging to his arm. Inside, my lawyer shredded him with evidence. His face turned pale as document after document proved his crimes. The mistress tried to testify on his behalf, but under cross-examination, she crumbled. By the end of the hearing, the judge froze David's accounts and assets pending investigation. The look on his face was priceless, pure panic. As I walked out of court, reporters shoved microphones in my face. "Amara, do you have a statement?" I smiled. "Yes. Don't play with a woman who has nothing left to lose." That night, David sent one last text. "You've ruined me. But this isn't over." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. He wasn't giving up. If anything, he was about to get more dangerous. I locked my doors, tightened my security, and waited. The storm was far from over. And then, 3 days later, I woke up to find a brick thrown through my window. Attached to it was a note. "You'll pay for this." My breath caught. The war had escalated from legal battles to something far darker. If you think the courtroom was intense, wait until you hear what David did next. The revenge he planned pushed me to my breaking point and forced me to fight back harder. Stay tuned, because next chapter is where betrayal turns deadly. Like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss what happened when he crossed the final line. The sound of shattering glass still echoed in my ears the next morning as I swept the broken window. The note that had been attached to the bricks sat on the counter. Its words burned into my mind. "You'll pay for this." My chest tightened, but I refused to let fear win. I tightened the locks on every door and installed cameras around the apartment. If David wanted to play dirty, I would be 10 steps ahead. Saad came over, her face pale. "Amara, this is getting dangerous. You need to report this." "I already have," I said, showing her the police report. "But the system moves slow. If I wait for them, he'll strike first." I checked my phone. No new messages from David, but I knew silence was his way of plotting. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the Lego skyline, I got a call from a private number. I answered cautiously. "You really think you can destroy me, Amara?" His voice was low, almost a growl. "I made you. Without me, you're nothing. You're finished." "David," I said calmly, "the only one finished here is you. And when I'm done, you'll wish you never met me." He laughed, a dark, hollow sound. "You think you're safe? Watch your back." The line went dead. The following days were tense. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every noise. But amid the fear, I started plotting. David had gone too far. It was time to end this game on my terms. First, I hired a private investigator. I needed to know every move David made. The PI was efficient, sending me photos of David meeting shady people in back alleys, withdrawing cash from hidden accounts, and even visiting the mistress late at night. The investigator uncovered something shocking. David had emptied a secret account of millions that he'd stolen under my name. He was planning to flee the country. Rage coursed through me, but I stayed calm. If he wanted to run, I'd make sure he had nowhere to go. One night, I sat on my balcony, sipping tea, when my phone pinged. It was an email from David. It contained a single video attachment. My hands shook as I clicked play. The video showed David in a hotel room, surrounded by men I didn't recognize. They were laughing, drinking, and in the background, the mistress smirked at the camera. David leaned in close and said, "Amara, this is just the beginning. You humiliated me in front of the world. Now it's my turn. Watch what happens next." The video cut off. My stomach twisted, but my fury rose higher than my fear. "You want war?" I whispered. "You got it." The next day, my lawyer filed an emergency motion to seize the stolen funds and press new charges. But before the papers could be processed, something unexpected happened. My car, parked outside my apartment, exploded. The blast shook the entire street, sending glass raining down. Neighbors screamed. The fire department rushed in, but my car was reduced to ashes. The police came, took statements, and promised an investigation. But I knew who was behind it. David had officially crossed the line from betrayal to attempted murder. So I grabbed my hand. "You need to leave, Amara. He's dangerous." "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not running. If he wants to fight, I'll end it. On my terms." That night, I called the PI again. "Find me every illegal thing he's done. Every scam, every fraud, every deal. I want it all." The investigator didn't disappoint. Within days, I had enough evidence to bury David legally and financially. Offshore accounts, fake businesses, stolen identities. The list was endless. I handed everything to my lawyer and the authorities. Arrest warrants were issued, but David vanished before they could catch him. Then, out of nowhere, I received an anonymous message. "Meet me at the old warehouse on Victoria Island if you want to end this. Come alone." My heart pounded. It was reckless, dangerous, but I knew this was my chance to finish it. I grabbed my coat, slipped a small camera into my bag, and drove to the location. The warehouse was dark, the air thick with tension. I stepped inside, my heels clicking against the floor. David emerged from the shadows, smirking. "You actually came." I stood tall. "You wanted me here." "What do you want, David?" He stepped closer, eyes wild. "I want everything you took from me. You ruined my life, Amara. You'll pay with yours. He reached into his pocket, pulling out something shiny. My breath caught. The scene froze in my memory like a nightmare. You think you've seen danger? Wait until you hear what happened in that warehouse. The next chapter will reveal how I survived and how I turned the tables once and for all. The warehouse smelled of rust and gasoline. My heartbeat drummed in my ears as David stepped into the flickering light, his shadow stretching across the cold floor. His hand clutched a knife, its blade catching the dim glow. You should have stayed quiet, Amara, he hissed, moving closer. I could have spared you. But no, you had to humiliate me in front of the world. I tightened my grip on my bag where my phone recorded every word. My voice was steady, though my insides quaked. You did that to yourself, David. You betrayed me. You stole from me, and now you're threatening me. Do you think this ends well for you? His laugh was manic. Ends well? Oh, it ends tonight, when you're gone. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes locked on his. You're not going to kill me, David. You don't have the guts. His face twisted with rage, and in a flash, he lunged. I dodged, adrenaline surging, my heels skidding on the dusty floor. The knife sliced through the air where my arm had been seconds earlier. I grabbed a metal rod lying nearby and swung it with all my strength, knocking the blade from his hand. He stumbled back, clutching his wrist. You think you can beat me? I already have. I spat, circling him like a predator. Every word you just said? It's recorded. The police are listening as we speak. His eyes widened. You're lying. I pulled my phone from my bag and held it up. The red recording light blinked. Try me. For a moment, he froze. Then, with a roar, he charged again. We crashed into a stack of crates, the impact sending boxes tumbling. Pain shot through my side, but I refused to let go of my phone. The commotion triggered the motion sensor lights outside. Sirens wailed in the distance. My backup was arriving. David realized it too. He bolted toward the back door, but I was faster. I grabbed his jacket and yanked him back, slamming him to the floor. You're done, David. I screamed as blue and red lights filled the warehouse. Police stormed in, guns drawn. Step away from him. I raised my hands and stepped aside. Two officers tackled David, cuffing him as he cursed and thrashed. The knife clattered across the floor. This is a setup, he yelled. She's lying. I didn't do anything. The lead officer held up my phone. We have the recording, sir. You're finished. As they dragged him away, he glared at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, Amara. I'll destroy you. I stood tall, bruised but unbroken. No, David. You just destroyed yourself. The officers escorted him into the squad car. The flashing lights faded into the night, leaving me standing alone in the empty warehouse. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor, shaking. The danger had passed, but the war was far from over. The following days were chaos. The news exploded with headlines. Groom arrested after attempted attack on bride, and Amara's courage exposes fraud, attempted murder. Support poured in from strangers online, while David's supporters grew quieter by the day. The mistress disappeared from social media, her accounts wiped clean. But even with David behind bars, I felt uneasy. I knew his influence ran deep. He had allies in places I couldn't see. Saad stayed with me at all times. Girl, you need to leave the city for a while, she urged. No, I said firmly. I won't hide. I'll finish what I started. In court, David appeared in an orange jumpsuit, still defiant. His lawyers tried to spin lies, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the fraud documents, the attempted attack, everything sealed his fate. The judge denied bail. David's trial would proceed, and he faced decades in prison. As I walked out of court, reporters swarmed me. Amara, how does it feel to finally be free of him? I smiled faintly. I'm not free yet. Justice isn't complete. That night, I got an email from an anonymous account. The subject line chilled me. You think he's the only one? Attached was a single photo, David shaking hands with a powerful businessman, one I recognized as the CEO of a company I had invested in. The caption read, "You're next." My stomach dropped. The web of betrayal was bigger than I imagined. I stared at the photo, my mind racing. This wasn't just about David anymore. Someone else was pulling strings. Someone who thought I would break. They were wrong. The The storm was far from over. In fact, the real enemy had just revealed themselves. If you think the warehouse showdown was intense, wait until you see how deep this betrayal goes. In the next chapter, I uncover the network behind David, and what I find will shake everything to its core. Like, comment, and subscribe, because next chapter will blow your mind. The photo haunted me all night. David shaking hands with the CEO of Goldline Investments, Mr. Richard Adeyemi, a man I once trusted with my family's money. The same man who had attended my engagement party, smiling, offering to help manage my inheritance. Suddenly, all the missing pieces clicked together. David wasn't acting alone. This betrayal was a bigger scheme, and I had just scratched the surface. My hands trembled as I called my lawyer, Mr. Okoye. Richard Adeyemi is involved. I have proof. He sounded alarmed. Amara, if this is true, we're dealing with more than a cheating groom. We're dealing with financial crime on a corporate level. You need to be careful. Careful? I was beyond that point. If Adeyemi thought I'd back down, he didn't know who he was messing with. The next day, I arranged a private meeting with the PI. We met in a quiet cafe away from prying eyes. He slid a thick folder across the table. What's this? I asked. Everything I've dug up on Adeyemi and David. You were right. David was just a pawn. Adeyemi has been laundering money through shell companies, and your assets were part of it. He used David to marry you, so he could control everything legally. My blood boiled. So this wasn't just love gone wrong. It was a business hit. The PI nodded. And it gets worse. Adeyemi is trying to move the stolen funds offshore before the investigation catches up. If he succeeds, you'll never see that money again. I clench my fists. Then we stop him. The PI leaned closer. There's a shareholders meeting at his company this Friday. If you can expose him there, with the media present, he's done. My mind raced. This was risky, dangerous even. But this was my chance to end them all in one strike. On Friday morning, I dressed sharply in a black suit, my hair slicked back, my confidence radiating like armor. Saad insisted on coming with me. If something goes wrong, at least I'll be there to call backup, she said. We arrived at the Goldline Investments Tower, cameras flashing as the press swarmed. Word had leaked that something big was about to happen. Inside the boardroom, Adeyemi sat at the head of the table, surrounded by executives. He smiled when he saw me, a snake in a suit. Amara, what a surprise. To what do we owe the honor? I set my bag on the table, pulling out documents. I'm here to show everyone what kind of man you really are. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. Careful with your words. Oh, I'm more than careful, I said, hitting play on my phone. The recording of David's confession filled the room, followed by new audio. Adeyemi's voice discussing offshore accounts and bribes. Gasps filled the room. Executives looked at each other nervously. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. Adeyemi slammed his hand on the table. This is nonsense. Fabricated. I slid photos and bank statements across the table. Fabricated? These are your signatures. These are your accounts. This is your downfall. Security burst in, but not for me. The police had arrived, led by investigators I had tipped off earlier. They surrounded Adeyemi, placing him under arrest. You can't do this, he shouted as they dragged him away. You'll regret this, Amara. I stood tall, staring him down. No, Richard. You'll regret underestimating me. The boardroom erupted in chaos as Adeyemi was taken away. Reporters swarmed me, microphones in my face. Amara, you just took down one of Lagos' most powerful men. How do you feel? I smiled. I feel like justice isn't finished yet. Because as much as this victory felt sweet, I knew David was still out there, plotting even from behind bars. And people like Adeyemi always had backups, always had allies. That night, I celebrated with Saad over wine, but the tension never left my chest. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a video. David, sitting in what looked like a prison cell, smirking at the camera. Congrats, Amara. You think you've won? You've only made me more dangerous. Enjoy your little victory while it lasts, because soon, you'll lose everything. My hand tightened around the phone. The war wasn't over. It was evolving. The very next day, I noticed I was being followed. A black car trailed mine everywhere I went. My calls began cutting out, and my bank app showed strange activity. Saad panicked. Girl, he's coming for you from the inside. You need to disappear for a while. No, I said, my voice steady. I'm not running. If they want a war, I'll give them one. But this time, I'm taking the fight to them first. I opened my laptop, stared at the evidence I still had, and began crafting a plan so bold it would shake the entire city. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about survival. You think the corporate takedown was the climax? Oh no, the worst is yet to come. In the next chapter, David's network strikes back harder than ever, and I have to risk everything to stay ahead. The following week felt like living in a nightmare. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every car behind me felt like a tale. Even the walls of my apartment seemed to whisper danger. The first sign came on a Monday morning. I opened my banking app to check my balances, and my heart dropped. Almost every account was frozen. My emergency fund, investments, even my mother's trust account were locked. A message flashed on the screen. Fraud investigation in progress. My lawyer called minutes later. Amara, someone filed fraudulent claims against you. They're saying you embezzled from Adeyemi's company. I laughed bitterly. Of course. This is David's work. He's pulling strings even from jail. Worse, Mr. Okoye said gravely. They have insiders helping him. Someone with high-level access. I clench my jaw. Then we find them, and we take them down. That night, I barely slept. My phone vibrated at 2 a.m. It was a text from an unknown number. You think you're safe? Look outside. My chest tightened. I crept to the window and peered through the blinds. A black SUV idled across the street, its headlights off. I couldn't see who was inside, but I knew it was no coincidence. I called Saad immediately. Pack your things. We're leaving tonight. We relocated to a secure apartment owned by one of my cousins, a place no one knew about. But even there, I felt watched. The next morning, my private investigator arrived with shocking news. David's allies are moving fast. They're bribing witnesses, paying off officials, even leaking fake evidence against you. My stomach churned. What do they want? To ruin you completely, he said. They want to destroy your reputation, drain your finances, and force you into hiding. And they won't stop there. I rubbed my temples. So we hit back harder. What do we have on them? The PI grinned. Plenty. Offshore accounts, secret recordings, bribes caught on tape. But to use it, you'll need to make a public move so big they can't bury it. 3 nights later, I attended a charity gala hosted by one of Lagos's wealthiest families. The event was crawling with powerful people, including some of Adeyemi's former allies who had turned against him after his arrest. I walked in wearing a bold red gown, commanding every eye in the room. Saad whispered, "You sure this is safe?" "No," I replied, "but it's necessary." As the speeches began, I slipped a USB drive to a trusted journalist I'd contacted earlier. On it was every piece of evidence against David's network. Proof of corruption, fraud, and attempted murder. "Release it tonight," I told him. "No matter what happens to me." He nodded, understanding the risk. Halfway through the gala, my phone buzzed. Another unknown text. "Leave now, or you won't walk out alive." Before I could react, a waiter approached, offering me a glass of champagne. My instinct screamed. I knocked the glass out of his hand, and it shattered on the floor. Security swarmed, revealing the waiter was armed with a syringe. Chaos erupted. Guests screamed as guards tackled the man, dragging him away. My heart pounded, but I stood tall. David's network had just tried to assassinate me in front of Lagos's elite. I grabbed the mic from the MC, my voice shaking but strong. This is what they've been doing to silence me. But I'm not afraid, and I won't stop until every single one of them is exposed. The crowd erupted in murmurs, phones recording. The story was out. There was no turning back. That night, the evidence leaked online. News outlets across Nigeria and beyond broadcast the scandal. Names were exposed, accounts frozen, investigations launched. The city buzzed with shock. But David wasn't done. The next day, I received a video call from an unknown prison number. I answered, and there he was, David, smiling like the devil behind bars. "Bravo, Amara. You've made quite the mess. But you forgot one thing. I still know your deepest secret, the one that can destroy you." My blood ran cold. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" he sneered. "Tell them about the deal you made 3 years ago." Or should I? Before I could reply, The call ended. Saad stared at me, wide-eyed. What deal is he talking about? I swallowed hard. There was something from my past, something I thought I had buried forever. If David exposed it, everything I built could crumble. But I couldn't show fear. Whatever he's planning, I'll be ready. Because one thing was clear, David wasn't just fighting for revenge. He wanted to drag me down with him, no matter the cost. That night, as the city raged with scandal, I sat in my apartment, staring at the phone. My past was coming back to haunt me. And if I didn't control the narrative, David would. I knew what I had to do. You think the assassination attempt was shocking? Wait until you learn what David is threatening to expose. In the next chapter, my darkest secret comes to light, and it changes everything. Stay tuned for the next chapter, because this is where betrayal turns personal. Like, comment, and subscribe, because the twist you're about to hear will leave you speechless. The rain poured heavily the next morning, as if the skies themselves were warning me that something terrible was coming. I sat by the window, watching droplets race down the glass, when my phone vibrated again. Another unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. David's voice dripped with venom. "Tick-tock, Amara. Time's running out. Should I tell them? Or will you confess first?" My grip tightened on the phone. "What do you want?" He chuckled. "You think this is about money? No, this is about watching you fall. I'm sending a little gift to the press in 1 hour. Let's see if you can stop me." The line went dead. My heart raced. If he had evidence of that deal from 3 years ago, my reputation would be in shambles. Back then, before my inheritance came through, I had invested in a company that turned out to be a front for illegal activities. I pulled out as soon as I discovered the truth, but I signed documents to cover my tracks. Documents David somehow had. If the public saw those, they wouldn't care about the context. To them, I would be no better than the criminals I exposed. I called Saad immediately. "David is going to leak something about me. We have an hour." She gasped. "What can we do in an hour?" "Get to the press before he does," I said, grabbing my laptop. "If this story is going to break, it's going to break on my terms." I typed furiously, drafting a statement that admitted just enough to stay ahead of the scandal. I recorded a video explaining what happened, how I unknowingly got involved, how I corrected my mistake, and how I refused to be blackmailed by a criminal. By the time David's leak hit the blogs, my video was already trending. His exposé looked like a desperate move, and public sympathy swung back to my side. But David didn't stop. Later that evening, while I was driving home, a black SUV sped up behind me. Its headlights blinded me as it rammed into my car, forcing me off the road. My vehicle spun out, crashing into a tree. Airbags deployed, glass shattered, and the world spun. I tasted blood, but somehow managed to crawl out of the wreck. The SUV screeched away into the night. Saad arrived minutes later, screaming my name. "Amara." "Oh my God, I'm fine." I groaned, clutching my side. "Just bruised." But this means only one thing. David's allies are getting desperate. She helped me in her car, tears streaming down her face. "Girl, you need to leave Lagos. You need to hide." I shook my head. "No, this ends here. I'm not running anymore." The next day, I met with the PI and Mr. Okoye. Together, we devised a plan to cut off David's network once and for all. We would freeze every offshore account linked to them, expose every dirty ally, and make sure none of them could touch me again. But to execute the plan, I needed one final piece of evidence, a ledger hidden in a safe house David once used. "Are you insane?" Saad said when I told her. "That place is crawling with his people." "I know," I said, slipping on a black jacket. "That's why I'm going tonight." Under the cover of darkness, I drove to the safe house on the outskirts of Lagos. The building was abandoned, windows boarded up, but I knew danger lurked inside. I moved silently, every creak of the floor making my heart pound. I found the safe in a hidden compartment under the floorboards. My hands shook as I entered the code I had memorized from old documents. The lock clicked. Inside was the ledger, a gold mine of incriminating transactions linking David's entire network to crimes across multiple countries. I snapped photos of every page and secured the book in my bag. But as I turned to leave, I heard footsteps. A voice hissed, "Going somewhere, Amara?" I spun around to see two men blocking the exit. They were tall, muscular, and armed. One stepped forward, smirking. "Boss says you don't leave this place alive." My pulse raced. I backed toward the window, gripping a metal pipe I'd picked up earlier. "Tell your boss I'm not dying tonight." They lunged, and chaos erupted. I swung the pipe, striking one across the head. The other grabbed me, but I elbowed him hard in the ribs, breaking free. The first man recovered, charging again, but I smashed the pipe against his knee, sending him crashing to the floor. I sprinted for the window, shattering the glass with the pipe, and leapt out into the night. My knees buckled as I hit the ground, but I kept running, clutching the ledger to my chest. I jumped into my car, tires screeching as I sped away, bullets whizzing past. My hands trembled, my breath ragged, but I had what I needed. When I got home, I collapsed on the floor, tears streaming down my face. I had risked everything, but now I had the power to end this once and for all. I called Mr. Okoye. "We have the evidence. Tomorrow, we bring him down." He paused. "Amara, are you sure you're ready for what's coming?" "They won't go quietly." "I'm ready," I said firmly. "Let them try." The next morning, as I prepared to hand over the evidence to the authorities, my phone buzzed again. A video call. David. He smirked, his eyes cold. "Nice move, Amara. But you've made a mistake. You have something of mine, and I want it back. If you don't deliver it to the location I send, someone close to you will pay the price." My blood ran cold. "What did you do, David?" He grinned. "You'll find out soon enough." The screen went black, leaving me trembling. Moments later, I received a text with a photo. My heart stopped. It was Saad, tied to a chair, a gag over her mouth, fear in her eyes. The photo of Saad tied to a chair burned in my mind like a brand. My heart pounded, my hands trembling as I clutched the phone. This wasn't just another threat. David had crossed the line, and now the stakes were life and death. Moments later, another text arrived. "Bring the ledger to the old shipping yard at midnight. Come alone. If I see cops, she dies." I gritted my teeth, rage boiling in my veins. He wanted me scared, desperate. Instead, he had awakened something far more dangerous inside me. I called Mr. Okoye immediately. "They have Saad. I have to go." "No," he snapped. "This is a trap, Amara. If you go alone, you won't come back." "I don't have a choice," I said, my voice shaking. "She's my sister in every way that matters. I can't let him kill her." He sighed. "At least let me arrange discreet backup." "Fine," I said, "but they stay out of sight. If David senses anything, she's dead." As midnight approached, I dressed in black and strapped a small hidden recorder to my chest. The ledger was in my bag, but I had also prepared a decoy, an identical book filled with blank pages. Driving through the empty streets, my headlights cut through the mist. Every corner, every shadow felt like a threat. My phone buzzed with a final text. "You have 5 minutes." The shipping yard loomed ahead, rusty containers stacked like tombstones. I parked my car and stepped out, the cold night air biting my skin. The place was silent, except for the distant hum of waves crashing against the dock. "Amara," David's voice echoed, sending chills down my spine. He stepped out from behind a container, flanked by 2 men with guns. His smile was sinister, his eyes glinting with malice. "Where's Saad?" I demanded, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at me. He gestured, and 2 more men dragged her into view. She was tied, her face bruised but alive. Her eyes met mine, pleading. David smirked. "The ledger. Now." I held up the bag. "Let her go first." He laughed. "Do you think you're in a position to negotiate?" One of his men cocked a gun, aiming at Saada's head. My heart stopped. "Fine," I said, tossing the bag toward him. It slid across the ground, stopping at his feet. He opened it, flipping through the pages. His smile vanished. "These are blank," he roared. "That's because the real ledger is already with the authorities," I said, my voice sharp. "By now, they have everything. You're finished." His face twisted with rage. "You stupid." Before he could finish, gunshots cracked through the night. My hidden backup had arrived, snipers taking out his men one by one. Chaos erupted. I dove behind a container, grabbing Saad and cutting her ropes with a knife I'd hidden in my sleeve. "Run!" I screamed. We sprinted through the maze of containers as bullets flew. David chased us, firing wildly. You can't run forever, Amara. I turned, grabbing a metal pipe, and swung it with all my strength. It connected with his arm, sending the gun flying. He lunged at me, tackling me to the ground. We wrestled, his hands around my throat, cutting off my air. You ruined everything, he spat. With the last of my strength, I grabbed a shard of glass and slashed his arm. He screamed, loosening his grip. I shoved him off and ran to where Saad waited with one of the backup officers. Come on, she yelled, dragging me toward safety. The police stormed in, surrounding David. He was bleeding, screaming like a madman, but still smiling through the pain. As they cuffed him, he shouted, You think this is over? You think prison can hold me? You'll see, Amara. You'll see. I stood there, bruised and shaking, staring at the man who had once promised me forever. No, David. You'll see me rise while you rot. Back at my apartment, Saad and I collapsed on the couch. She hugged me tightly, sobbing. You saved me. I held her close, tears streaming down my face. I promised I would. The next morning, news outlets exploded with headlines. Amara survives kidnapping attempt as authorities dismantle criminal network. The Ledger's evidence brought down not only David but dozens of his allies. For the first time in months, I felt hope. The nightmare was ending, or so I thought. That evening, I received a final letter smuggled from prison. The handwriting was David's. You may have won this battle, Amara, but wars don't end so easily. When I get out, I'll burn everything you love. I crumpled the letter, my jaw set. Let him try, because I wasn't the same woman he betrayed at that altar. I was stronger, and if he dared to come back, I would be ready. You think the rescue was the end? Think again. In the next chapter, David's last move shakes everything to its core, forcing me into one final battle that will decide everything. 3 weeks passed after the shipping yard rescue. I started to breathe again, to live again. Lagos felt bright for the first time in months. I spent mornings walking with Saad, afternoons working with my lawyers to finalize the legal takedown of David's empire, and nights sleeping without fear. Almost. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Men like David didn't just fade away. They rotted, plotted, and waited. My fears were confirmed one stormy night. The news flashed across the TV. Breaking, notorious fraudster David Okoro escapes prison in daring midnight breakout. I dropped my glass of water, the shards scattering across the floor. The anchor continued. Authorities are warning the public to stay vigilant. Okoro is considered extremely dangerous. Saad grabbed my hand. Oh my God, Amara. He's coming for you. I didn't answer. I just stared at the screen, my heart pounding like a war drum. The next days were tense. I increased security, hired bodyguards, and avoided public events. But David was like smoke. You couldn't see him, but you felt him everywhere. Then came the first sign, a dead bird left on my balcony with a note pinned to it. Tick-tock, my bride. The final dance begins. I crumpled the note, anger flooding my veins. If you want the final dance, I'll lead. I met with the PI and Mr. Okoye in a secured office. David escaped with help. Someone on the inside betrayed the system, the PI said. Boo, I demanded. He slid a photo across the table. One of the prison guards shaking hands with an unknown man. This guard opened the gate. He was paid off by someone still loyal to David. My jaw clenched. Then we cut off his escape routes. Freeze everything. Alert everyone. I don't care what it takes. Mr. Okoye nodded. We'll set a trap. He'll come for you, Amara. That's when we take him down for good. That night, I stayed in my apartment, every light on, my body tense. Hours passed in silence, until, bang, the power went out. My heart leapt into my throat. The apartment plunged into darkness. I reached for the flashlight in my drawer, clicking it on. Its beam cut through the blackness, revealing shadows creeping along the walls. Footsteps echoed. Hello, my love. David's voice purred from the darkness. Miss me? I spun around, my flashlight catching his face, scarred from our last fight, but his eyes still burning with madness. How did you get in here? I demanded. He smirked. You should know by now. Locks mean nothing to me. I backed toward the kitchen, my hand inching toward the drawer where I kept a small pistol. You're insane, David. The police are looking for you. Give up. He laughed. Give up? No, Amara. Tonight, we end this. One of us walks away. The other doesn't. With a sudden lunge, he grabbed me by the arm, twisting it painfully. I screamed, kicking him hard in the stomach. He stumbled back, and I bolted for the drawer, pulling out the gun. Don't move, I shouted, hands trembling. He grinned, stepping closer. You don't have the guts. The front door burst open. My bodyguards stormed in, guns raised. Drop it, they yelled. David snarled, spinning to grab a knife from the counter. He lunged at me, but I fired. The shot echoed through the apartment. David collapsed to the floor, clutching his shoulder, blood spreading fast. He gasped, coughing. You really shot me. I stood over him, my hands still shaking, tears streaming down my face. You left me no choice. The guards cuffed him as sirens wailed outside. As they dragged him out, he looked back at me, his smile faint but chilling. This isn't the end, Amara. Even in chains, I'll haunt you. I swallowed hard, staring at the man who had once vowed to love me forever. Not anymore, David. You've done haunting me. The trial was swift and brutal. With the ledger, the recordings, and now the attempted murder, David received multiple life sentences with no possibility of parole. His network collapsed, his allies scattered, and his name became a cautionary tale whispered across Lagos. But even with him locked away, I felt the ghost of his betrayal lingering in my heart. Healing would take time, but I was free, and freedom was enough. Or so I thought. 1 month later, I received a letter with no return address. The handwriting made my blood run cold. You may have caged me, Amara, but cages have keys. Watch your back. I burned the letter, watching the flames consume it, and whispered to myself, let him try, because I was no longer the woman he broke. I was the woman who survived. You thought that was the end? Think again. In the final chapter, I rise from the ashes, rebuild my life, and deliver the ultimate revenge David never saw coming. The day of David's sentencing was supposed to be the end, but in my heart, it didn't feel finished. True, he was in prison, his empire destroyed, but his words haunted me. Cages have keys. For weeks, I lived like a shadow, security at every corner, alarms on every window, but my nights were restless. I kept replaying every moment from our wedding to the shipping yard, to the night he escaped. I had survived every attack, but survival wasn't enough. I wanted closure. I wanted to make sure David never had power over me again. 3 months later, I got my chance. My lawyer, Mr. Okoye, called me with shocking news. Amara, I found something. Before David's arrest, he left behind a hidden trust under another name. It holds millions. Money stolen from dozens of victims. If we seize it legally, you can restore what he took from you and the others. My chest tightened. Where is it? In an offshore bank, he said, but we'll need to work with international authorities to claim it. It's risky. His allies may try to stop us. I exhaled slowly. Then we moved fast. This is the final piece. I flew to Dubai, where the account was located, with a team of investigators and legal officials. The city skyline sparkled as we drove to the bank. Every step felt like walking into enemy territory. Inside the vault room, the bank manager reviewed the documents, his brow furrowed. We've been expecting this case. The account is under a fake identity, but the evidence you provided confirms ownership was tied to David Okoro's fraud operations. My hands trembled as I signed the final papers. The funds were frozen and redirected, not just to me, but to all victims who had been swindled. It was more than justice. It was redemption. As I stepped outside, the sun warming my face, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. But David's reach wasn't done trying. That night, as I prepared to return to Lagos, a masked man ambushed me outside my hotel. He lunged, a knife flashing in his hand. Instinct kicked in. I grabbed his wrist, twisting it hard, forcing the blade to clatter to the ground. Security tackled him seconds later. The mask was ripped off. It wasn't David, but one of his loyal allies. You'll regret this, he hissed. He's coming for you. I stared him down coldly. No, he's finished. Back in Lagos, I visited the prison where David was held. I wanted to see him one last time, not out of fear, but to reclaim the final piece of my power. The guard led me into the visiting room. David sat there, chained, his face pale but his eyes still burning with the same madness. "You look good, my bride," he sneered. "Come to gloat." I sat across from him, calm as a storm. "No, David, I came to tell you this. You don't control me anymore. You never will." He smirked. "You think locking me up changes anything? You'll always remember me." I leaned in. "Yes, I'll remember you. As the man who tried to destroy me and failed. As the man who lost everything while I rebuilt my life." His smirk faded just slightly. I stood. "Enjoy your cage, David. It's the only kingdom you have left." Without another word, I walked away, leaving him screaming behind me. The heavy door closed, and with it, the last piece of his hold over me. Months passed. I rebuilt my career, investing wisely, helping the victims of David's fraud recover their losses. I even started a foundation for women who had survived betrayal and abuse. For the first time in years, I smile without fear. At the opening ceremony of my foundation, Saad stood beside me, tears in her eyes. "You did it, Amara. You turned all that pain into power." I smiled, gazing at the crowd of women whose lives I hoped to change. "No, we did it. And this is just the beginning." That night, as I watched the city lights from my balcony, my phone buzzed with a final anonymous text. "I'll never stop thinking about you. Forever yours, David." I deleted it without replying, because I no longer needed to fight his ghost. I had won. My story started with betrayal at the altar, but it ended with strength. To anyone listening, remember this. No matter how broken they try to make you, you can rise. You can win. Thank you for following my journey. If this story moved you, like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear that no betrayal can break a strong heart.